All right, subpart C, roadway worker protection. We're on railroad workplace safety. Subpart C, roadway worker and protection. 214.301. The purpose is the scope. The purpose is the subpart is to prevent accidents, casualties caused by the moving of the railroad cars, the locomotive, the railroad maintenance and machines, the tracking of the roadway workers, or roadway maintenance machines. The subpart of the prescribes the minimum safety standards for the roadway workers. Each railroad and railroad contractor may prescribe additional moving and the stringent operational rules, safety rules, and other special instructions that are inconsistent with the subpart. The subpart prescribes the safety standards related to the movement of the roadway maintenance and the machines where such movements affect the safety of the roadway workers. The subpart does not authorize the effect movements of the roadway maintenance machines that they are conducted under the authority of the train dispatcher, control operator, and the operating rules of the railroad. 214.302. The information collection requirements. The information collection requirements for this part reviewed by the Office Management Budgeting and pursuant to the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1995, the Public Law 101.13, and 20109 Statute 163, 1995 Code is revised in Title 44 U.S. Standard Code 3501 to 3520, as are assigned to the Office Management Budget Control 2130-0539. The FRA may not conduct or sponsor and a respondent to the non-required to respond to a collection of information unless it is displayed in the current validity of Office Management and Budget Control number. The information collection requirements are also found in these such statutes. 214.303, the Railroad On-Track Safety Program, and generally each railroad is which of the part of the player applies that you shall adopt and implement a program that will afford on-track safety for all railroad workers whose duties are performed on the railroad. Each such program shall provide it for the relevant for the levels of protection specified in this part. Each on the track of the safety program adopted with the comply with the parts include the procedures to be used in each railroad of the monitoring the effectiveness of the compliance with the program. 214.305, the compliance stage. Each of the program adopted with the railroad shall comply not later than the date specified on the following schedule for each Class 1 railroad, including the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, each railroad providing with the communicator service in the metropolitan area, suburban area of March 15, 1997 for each of the Class 2 railroad, April 15, 1997 for each of the Class 3 railroad, switching in the terminal railroad, and any railroad not otherwise classified May 15, 1997. For each of the railroad commencing operations after the pertinent date specified in this section, the date on which the operations commence. 214.307, reviewing and approval of the individual on-track safety programs of the FRA. Each of the railroads shall notify the writing of the associated administrative with the Safety Federal Railroad Administration errors in 1200 New Jersey Avenue, Southeast Washington, D.C., not less than 1 month before it's on the track of the safety program because of its effectiveness. The notification shall include the effective date of the program and the address of the office in which the program documents are available for the review, photocopying by the representative of the Federal Railroad Administrator. The name and the title and the address, telephone number to the primary person to be contacted with regard to the review of the program. The notification procedure shall also apply to the subsequent changes to the railroad on-track safety of the program. After the receipt of the notification from the railroad, the Federal Railroad Administration will conduct a formal review on the track of the safety program. The Federal Railroad Administration will notify the primary railroad and the contacting person the result of the review in writing whether the on-track safety of the program changes the program and have been approved the administrator, if not approved, the specific points in which the program changes are deficient. Railroad on-track program will take effect with the establishment compliance with the date of the statute 214.305 without regard with the date of the review. The approval of the Federal Railroad Administration changes to the railroad program will take effect of the date established to each of the railroad without regard of the date of the review of the approval of the FRA Railroad Administration. 214.309, on-track safety of the program documents. Rules and operating procedures governing the track occupancy protection shall be maintained together in one of the manually and be readily available to all the roadway workers. Each of the roadway workers are responsible for on-track safety, and others, each lone worker, shall be provided with and shall maintain a copy of the program documents. The 214.311. 214.311. Responsibility of employers. Each of the employers is responsible for the understanding and compliance with the employees with its rules and the requirements of each of the part. Each employer shall guarantee that each of the employment absolute right of the challenge of the good faith whether on the track safety procedures to be applied at the job location comply with the rules of the operating railroad to the remaining clearing of the track until the challenge is resolved. Each employer shall have a place in the written procedure to achieve the prompt and the equitable resolutions of the challenge may be in accordance with the statute 214.311. 214.313, responsible for the individual roadway workers. Each roadway worker is responsible for the following of the on-track safety of the rules of the railroad upon which the roadway worker is located. The roadway worker shall not foul on the track except for the necessary for the performance of the duty. Each roadway worker is responsible to exert on the track safety that is being provided before the following of the track. Each of the roadway worker may refuse any of the directive to violate on the track safety rule shall inform the employer to in accordance with the statute 214.311 whenever the road worker makes a good faith determination that on-track safety provisions to be applied at the job location do not comply with the rules of the operating railroad. 214.315, supervision and communication. Whenever the employer assigns the duty to the roadway worker that calls for the employee to follow a track, the employer shall provide with the employee with an on-track safety job briefing that a minimum including the following: 1, the information on the means of the being which on the track safety is to be provided for each track identified to be followed, instruction on each of the track safety procedures to be followed, information about and any of the adjacent tracks on safety and such tracks if required to be subpart of the or deemed necessary to the roadway worker, and in the change of the identification of any of the roadway maintenance machines that will be foul on such tracks, and 4, discussion of the nature of the work to be performed and the characteristics of the work location to be ensured the compliance with the subpart of job briefing on the track of the safety shall be deemed to be completely only after the road worker has acknowledged the understanding of the on-track safety procedures instruction presented. See, every road worker of the road worker group whose duties were requiring the following of the track shall have one road worker designated by the employer to provide on-track safety for all the members of the group. The designated person shall be qualified under the rules of the railroad to conduct the train operations on these tracks, to provide the protection necessary for the on-track safety on each individual group. The responsibility person may be designated generally for specifically a particular work situation. Before any of the member of the roadway work group fouls the track, the designated person provided with on-the-track safety for the group under the paragraph C. This section shall inform each of the roadway worker of the on-track safety procedures to be used and followed during the performance of the work at the time and location. Each of the roadway workers shall be again to be informed to any of the time of the on-track safety procedures changing during the work period. Such information shall be given to all the roadway workers affected before the change is effective, and except in the case of those emergencies, any road workers who, because of an emergency, cannot be notification in advance shall be immediately warned to leave in the following spaces and shall not return to the following space until the on-track safety is reestablished. All right. E. Each lone worker shall communicate with it at the beginning of each duty during the supervisor or an other designated employee to receive the job briefing to advise his or her planned itinerary of the procedures that he or she intends to use for on-track safety. When the communication channels are disabled, the job briefing shall be conducted as soon as possible after the beginning of the work period and when the communications are restored. 214.315, supervision communication. When an employer assigns the duty to the roadway worker that calls for that employee to follow the tracks, the employer shall provide with the employee with an on-track safety job briefing with a minimum includes the following information of the means by which the track safety is provided on each of the track identified to be followed, 2, the instruction of each of the track of the safety procedure to be followed, and 3, information about any adjacent tracks on track safety for such tracks if required, but the subpart deemed necessary by the roadway worker in charge of identification of any of the roadway maintenance machines that which follow all such tracks, all discussion of the nature of works that perform the characteristics of the work location to ensure the compliance with the subpart. 214.317, on-track safety procedures. Generally, each employer subject to the provisions of this part shall provide only provide on-track safety for the road workers. Adopting a program that contains specific rules of protecting roadway workers that comply with the provisions of 214.319 and 214.337 for this part. 214.319, work limits in general. Work limits established on the controlled track shall be conformed to the provisions of 214.321, exclusive track occupancy. 214.323, follow time, or 214.325, train coordination. Working with limits established on the non-controlled track shall conform to the provisions of the 214.327 inaccessible track. Working limits shall be established under any of the procedures any procedure shall in addition with conform to the following provisions. Only a roadway worker who is qualified in accordance with the Statute 214.353 of this part shall establish that they have the control of the working limits for the purpose of establishing track safety. The roadway worker shall have the control over the working limits on any of the segment of the track. All affected roadway workers shall be notified before working limits are released of the operating trainee. Working limits shall not be released until all affected roadway workers have either left the track or have been afforded on-track safety through the train approaching the warning in accordance with the statute 214.329 of this subpart. 214.321, exclusive track occupancy. Working limits established on a controlled track through the use of the exclusion track occupancy procedure shall comply with the following requirements. The track with the working limits shall be placed under the control of one of the roadway workers by either the authority issued by to the roadway worker in charge of the train dispatcher, control operator who controls the train movements on the track, the flagman stationed at each of the entrance to the track within the working limits instructed by the roadway workers in charge to permit the movement of the train's equipment into the work limits only as permitted by the road worker in charge of the road worker in charge, causing fixed signals at each of the entrances to work limits to display an expected indicating stop. B. An authority of the exclusive track occupancy given to the roadway worker in charge of the working limits shall be transmitted on written or printed document directly by a relay through a designated employee into the data transmission by an oral communication to the roadway worker by the train dispatcher or the control operator in charge of the track. 1. Where the authority for the exclusive track occupancy is transmitted orally, the authority shall be written as in received of the roadway worker in the charge of the repeated to the issuing of the employee of the verification. 2. The roadway worker in charge of the working limits shall and maintain position for the written or printed audit authority for the exclusive track and occupancy while the authority for the working of the limits is in effect. The train dispatcher or the control operator in charge of the track shall be written in electronic or record of all authorities issued to establish the exclusive track occupancy. The extent of the working limits established through the exclusive track occupancy shall be defined by one of the following physical features clearly identified to the locomotive engineer or the person operating the train of the railroad equipment, a flagman with instructions and capability to hold all trains equipment clear of the working limits, a fixed signal that displays an aspect indicated stop. The stop station shown in the timetable identified by the name with a sign beyond the train movement of the prohibited by the train movement authority. The provisions of the direct train control system are clearly identifiable by posts beyond the train movement is prohibited by the train movement authority and provision of the direction of the train control system. Clearly identified physical and located and prescribed by the operating rules of the railroad trains may be not passed without proper authority. Movement of the trains and roadway maintenance machines within the working limits established through the exclusive track occupancy shall be made only under the direction of the roadway worker having the control over the working limits. Such movement shall be restricted to speed unless higher speeds have been specifically authorized by the roadway worker in charge of working limits. Alright, 214.323, fouling time. The work limits established on the control track through the use of the foul time procedure shall comply with the following requirements. A foul time may be given orally and written in the train dispatcher control operator only after the employee withheld the authority of all the train to move into and within the work limits during the foul time period. Each road worker into whom the foul time is transmitted orally or shall be repeated the track number, track limits, and time limits of the foul time to be issuing the employee of the verification before the foul time becomes effective. The train dispatcher or the control operator shall not permit the movement of the trains or any other on-track equipment onto the working limits of the protected by foul time until the roadway work who obtained the foul time has reported clear of the track. Alright, 214.325, train coordination. Working limits established by the roadway worker through the use of the train coordination shall comply with one of the following requirements. Work limits established by the train coordinator shall be within the segments of the track or the tracks upon which only one train holds the exclusive authority to remove. The road worker who has establishing work limits of the train coordination shall communicate with the member of the crew of the train holding with the exclusive authority to move. They shall determine that the train is visible and the roadway worker who is establishing the working limits. The train is stopped. Further movements of the train will be made only as permitted by the roadway worker in charge of the working limits, while the working limits will remain in the effect, and the crew of the train will not give the exclusive authority to move until the work limits have been released for the train crew by the road worker in charge of the working limits. All right, 214.327. Inaccessible tracks. Work limits on the non-controlled track shall be established by the rendering of the track within the working limits of physical inaccessibility of the trains to at each possible point to entry by one of the following features: a flagman with the instruction or capability to hold all trains and equipment clear of the working limits, the switching derail line with to prevent the accessible of the work limits, and the secured with an effective securing device by the road worker in charge of the working limits. Discontinuity of the rail of the precludes the passenger trains of the engines include the working limits. Working limits are controlled by the track that connects directly with the inaccessible track established by a roadway worker in charge of the working limits of the inaccessible track, or as a remotely controlled with a switch aligned with to prevent access to the working limits of the secured by the control operative, such as a remotely controlled switch and application of the locking its blocking device to control that switch when 1. The control operator has secured the remotely controlled switch by the applying of the lock or the blocking device to the control of the switch. 2. The control operator has notified the roadway worker who has established the working limits that have been requested, protection that has been provided. And 3. The control operator is not permitted to remove the locking of the blocking device from the control of the switch until the receiving permission to do so from the road worker who has established the working limits. B. The trains of the roadway maintenance machines within the working limits established by the means an accessible track shall move only under the direction of the roadway worker in the charge of the working limits and shall move at the restricted speed. No operable locomotives or other items of the non-track equipment except for those present moving under the direction of the roadway workers in charge of the working limits shall be located within the working limits established by the means of an accessible track. All right, 214.329. Train approaching warning provided by the watchmen and lookouts. Roadway workers and roadway work group who follow on any of the track outside of the working limit shall be given a warning of the approaching train by one or more of the watchmen and lookouts in accordance with the following provisions. The train approaching the warning shall be given sufficient time to enable the road worker to move and occupy a previously arranged place of the safe not less than 15 seconds before the train moving at the maximum speed authorized on the track can pass the location of the roadway worker. The watchmen and lookouts assigned to provide the train approaching the warning shall be devote the full attention to detecting the approaching of the train's communication and warning thereof, and shall not be assigned and any other duties while the function of the watchman and lookouts the means of the use by the watchman and lookout with the communicating a train approaching the warning shall be distinctive and shall clearly signify to all recipients the warning of the train and other on-track equipment is approaching at each roadway worker who it depends upon the train approaching the warning from the on-track safety shall maintain a position that will enable him or her to receive the train approaching warning and the communicated with the watchman lookout at any of the time while on the track. Safety is provided with the by a train approaching warning. Watchman lookout shall communicate with the train approaching warnings by the meaning that does not require the warned and employed to be looking at in any particular direction at the time of the warning that can be detected by the warned employee regardless of the noise or distraction of the worker. Every roadway worker who is assigned the duties of the watchman and lookout shall be trained and qualified and designated in writing by their employer to do so in accordance with the provisions of 214.349. Every watchman and lookout should provide with the employer with the equipment necessary for the compliance with the on-track safety duties with the watchman and lookout will perform. All right, 214.331. Definition of the train location. A roadway worker may establish an on-track safety for the using of definite train location only where the permitted by and in accordance with the following provisions. A Class 1 railroad of the commuter railroad may use only definite tracks locations and establish on-track safety at the points which such procedures were and used in January 15, 1997. B. Each Class 1 communicator railroad shall include in its on-track safety program for approval of the FRA in accordance with the Statute 214.307 for the part of the schedule for the phase-out of the use of the definite train location to establish on-track safety. The railroad other Class 1 communicator railroad may use the definite track location to establish on-track safety on their subdivisions only where one such procedure were in use on January 1st, January 15th, 1997. The number of the trains operated on the subdivision does not exceed three during any given 9-hour period, and the roadway workers are on duty for during the 12 permit period of the roadway workers are on duty. The definite train location shall only be used to establish on-track safety according with the following provisions. Definite train location information shall be issued only by the train dispatcher who is designated to authorize the train movements over the track from which the information is provided. The definite train location list shall indicate all the trains to be operated on the track from which the list is provided during the time from which the list is effective. Trains not shown on the definite train location list shall not be operated on the track from which the list is provided during the time for which the list is effective until each of the roadway worker to whom the list has been issued but has not been notified of the train movement has been acknowledged for the notification of the train dispatcher and has been canceled. The list that Austin can cancel shall be invalid for on-track safety. 4. Definite train and location shall not be used to establish on-track safety within limits of the manual interlocking or on track over which the train movements are governed by a traffic control system or a manual block system. 5. Roadway workers using definite train location over the on-track safety shall be not followed on the track within 10 minutes before the earliest time that the train is due to depart with the last station at which the time is shown in approach of the roadway worker's location or until the train has passed the location of the railroad worker. The railroad shall not permit a train to depart in location designated by the definite train location list before the times shown therein. Each roadway worker who uses the definite train location to establish an on-track safety must be qualified on the relevant physical characteristics of the territory from which the train location information is provided. 214.333 informational lineups of the train. A railroad is permitted to include the informational lineups of the train in its on-track safety program for the use of only on the subdivision for the railroad upon which such procedures was in effect on March 14, 1996. B. Each procedure for the use of the informational lineup of the trains found in and on the track safety program shall include all provisions necessary to protect the roadway workers using the procedures against being struck by trains or on any other on-track equipment. Each of the on-track safety programs that provide for the use of the information lineup shall be included with the schedule discontinuation of the procedure by a definite date. 214.335 on-track safety procedure for roadway worker groups general. No employer subject to the provisions of the part shall require to permit a roadway worker who is a member of the roadway worker group to follow a track unless the on-track safety is provided by either working limits of the train approaching warning or a definite train location in accordance with the applicable provisions of statute 214, 319, 321, 323, 325, 327, 329, and 331. No roadway worker shall be a member of the roadway worker group shall follow on the track without having been informed of the roadway worker responsible for the on-track safety of the roadway worker group on the track safety is provided. 214.336 on the track safety procedure for certain roadways for the work groups of adjacent tracks. 1. Procedures general rule except for the provided in paragraph E of this section on track safety is required for each of the adjacent control track with the railroad work group with at least one of the railroad workers on the ground is engaged in a common task with on-track self-propelled equipment or coupled equipment onto an occupied track. The required on-the-track safety shall be established through 214.319 working limits general and 329 training approaching warning provided with the watchmen and lookouts as more specifically described in this section. 2. The special circumstances arising in the territories within the last 3 tracks if an occupied track is between 2 adjacent controlled tracks. If the occupied track has been 2 adjacent controlled tracks and one of the adjacent controlled tracks has one or more train or other on the track of equipment movements authorized permitted at least at the speed of 25 miles per hour or less or 40 miles per hour or less for one or more of the passenger trains or other passengers on the track equipment movements, and the other adjacent control track has one or more of the concurrent trains and other track equipment movements of authorized and permitted speeds of over 25 miles an hour or over 40 miles per hour for one or more of the passenger trains or other passenger on-track equipment movements. The more restrictive procedures in paragraph D for the Section apply. 3 definitions as used in the section. Adjacent controlled track means a controlled track whose track center is in the space 19 feet or less from the track center of the occupied track. Adjacent track means the controlled non-controlled track whose track center is spaced less than 25 feet from the track center of the occupied track. Inter-track barrier means of a continuous barrier, the permanent, the semi-permanent, permanent nature of the spans of the entire work of the area, the least 4 wheels, 4 feet in the height, and that is sufficient strength to prevent a roadway worker from following the adjacent track. A minor correction means one or more repairs of the minor nature, including but not limited to welding, spiking, anchoring, hand tamping, joint bolt replacing that are accomplished with the hand tools and handheld, hand-supported, hand guide power tools. This term does not include the machining, spiking, machine tamping, and any similar distracting repair. Occupied track means the track on which the track is self-propelled and equipment of the complied with the equipment is authorized permitted to be located while engaged in the common task while the road worker group within at least one of the railroad workers on the ground. B. The procedure for the adjacent controlled track movements over 25 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour if the passenger movements, if the train or other train on the track equipment is authorized to move on an adjacent controlled track at the speed greater than 25 miles an hour or is greater than 40 miles an hour for a passenger train, all the other passenger on track equipment movement, each of the roadway worker and the roadway worker group that is affected by such a movement must comply with the following procedures. 1. Cease working and occupying a predetermination place of safety, except for the work activities as described in paragraph E in this section. Each of the affected roadway workers shall, as described in table 1 of this section, cease on the ground work and equipment movement that is being performed between the rails of the being occupied on the track, on one or both sides of the occupied track, the occupied predetermined place for the safety upon receiving either the watchman lookout warning, alternatively a notification that roadway worker in charge of the intent is to permit one or more train or other train equipment on-track equipment movements through the working limits of the adjacent track, controlled track. Alright, 2. Resuming work. An effective roadway worker who may resume on the ground work and equipment movement on and between the rails of the occupied track or one on both sides of the occupied track as described in table 1 of this section only after the trailing end of all the trains other than on-track equipment movement of the adjacent controlled track from which the warning notification has been received in accordance with the paragraph B1 of this section and has been passed and remains in the heads of the railroad worker. 2. If the train other than the on-track equipment stops at the trailing end of the past all the affected roadway workers of the roadway worker group, the work to be performed in between the rails of the occupied track on one or both sides of the occupied track as described in table 1 of this section ahead on the trailing end. The train on the other track equipment on the adjacent control track may resume A if on the track safety head through the train approaching the warning and 314-329 has been established on the adjacent control track. B after the roadway worker charge is communicated with the member of the train crew on the track and equipment operator and establish further movements of such train on track equipment shall be made only as permitted by the roadway worker in charge. C. Procedure for the adjacent control track movements at 25 miles or less or 40 miles per hour. If the passenger movements, if a train or on the track equipment is authorized or permitted to move the adjacent control track at a speed of 25 miles per hour or less, or at a speed of 40 miles per hour less than the passenger train or the passenger on the track equipment of the movement of such a roadway worker if the roadway worker group is affected by such a movement, it must comply with the procedures listed in paragraph B of this section, except for the equipment movement of the railways occupied with the track on guard work performed exclusively between the railroads, i.e. not breaking the plane of the rails of the occupied track may continue provided with the no on-the-ground work is performed within the area of 25 feet in the front or 25 feet behind of any of the on-track self-propelled equipment or coupled equipment permitted to moved on occupied track. D. Discretion of the roadway worker in charge. Nothing in the subpart prohibits the road worker in charge from establishing on-track safety in one or more adjacent tracks as he or she deems necessary, consistent with both purposes or requirements of the subpart. E. Exceptions to certain requirements for the adjacent control track on-track safety. No one-track safety other than the required paragraph F of this section provided with under paragraph D of this section. This is required by the paragraph A through C of the section for the adjacent control track during the time that the roadway worker of the group the exclusive performing one or more of the following work activities. One on the ground working performed on the side of the occupied track with a meeting with the specified conditions of roadway worker with all of its on the ground roadway workers other than those performing the work in accordance with the another exception of the paragraph E of this section performing work while exclusive position on the side of the occupied track as follows with the further specified in the table 1 of this section. 1. The side of there is no adjacent track to the side with one or more adjacent tracks and the closest which has the working limits on it. No movements permitted within such working or limits of the roadway workers in charge. The side of with one or more adjacent tracks provided that they is an inter-track barrier between the occupied track with the closest adjacent track on the set on that side. 2. The maintenance of the repairs performed either on the alongside within the parameter of the roadway maintenance machine, coupled with equipment on the other occupied track. One or more of the roadway workers performing the maintenance on the repairs along with the side of the roadway maintenance machine or coupled equipment and provided with such machine or equipment would effectively prevent the worker from following the adjacent control track on the other side of the such equipment. And that the such maintenance of the repairs are performed with all the position on the side of the occupied track of the described in paragraph E1, 1, E2, and E3, table 1 of this section. 2. One of the railroad workers on the under the railway maintenance of the machine, coupled in equipment and performing the maintenance of the repairs within the perimeter of the machine and the equipment, provided that no part of this person breaks the plane of the rail of the occupied track except when toward one of the sides of the occupied track is described in paragraph E1, 1, E2, and E3, table 1. Section A is a boom other than equipment extended beyond the bound body of the roadway maintenance machine coupled with equipment toward the adjacent control track is not considered to be within the parameter of the machine coupled with equipment. 3. The working activities involving certain equipment and purpose one or more on-ground roadway workers engaged in a common task and occupied track within the on-track self-propelled equipment coupled with equipment consistent with exclusively one or more of the type of equipment described in the paragraphs E3, 1 and E3 through E3. The section, if there's such a roadway group with expected with the group is authorized and permitted to operate on the same occupied track, while the working limits of the separate roadway worker group performing the work of the subject to the requirement of this section non-accepted the groups, the vice versa non-accepted group is authorized or permitted to operate the same occupied track and within the working limits of the exact expected group. The groups must be conducted on track safety job briefing to determine if the adjacent control track on track safety is necessary for the accepted group. Such a determination shall be made with the roadway worker in the charge of the working limits. However, if the group is or in such proximity where the ability of the roadway workers are accepted the group to hear or see the approaching trains and others around the track equipment is impaired of the background of the noise lights and sight obstructions, any other physical conditions caused by equipment that is exception does not apply with the adjacent control track on the track safety must be provided with both groups. The exception otherwise to provide work activities involving one or more of the following types of equipment: 1. High rail vehicle, other railway rail-bound vehicle other than catenary maintenance tower vehicle being used for the inspection minor correction proposes provided that such vehicle is not coupled to one or more railroad cars in accordance with statute 214-315 when multiple high rail or rail bound vehicles being used in the inspection for the minor correction of are engaged in common tasks for the on-track safety job briefing shall include the discussion of the nature of the work to be performed to determine if the adjacent control track on the track safety is necessary. 2. An automated inspection for the being of the inspection for the minor correction purposes. 3. A catenary maintenance tower of the car or vehicle provided that all the on-ground working engaged with the common task other than those performing the work in accordance with another exception in paragraph E of this section are positioned with the gauge of the occupied track on the sole purpose of the applying for the removing of the grounds. F. The procedure for the components of the roadway maintenance machines following an adjacent control track is set for the provided with the statute 214-341. C. A component with the roadway work maintenance machine shall not as follow the adjacent contract unless working limits have been established in the adjacent control track. There are no movements permitted within the working limits by the roadway worker in charge that would affect any one of the road workers engaged in a common task with such machine. Here's the table. Here's the other table. Working limits. These are sketched out. I'll go over them. It's probably one of All right. We're gonna stop there, and then I'm gonna come back with the graphics, and we're gonna come read it again. We're gonna start from we're on page 22.